Welcome to Rosie the Reviewer. We're your hosts. I'm Sam.
And I'm Marcia.
And we like World War II media, and we want to talk about it. Welcome back to Rosie the Reviewer. This week we're talking about the film Pressure, which came out this year in 2026. It was directed by Anthony Maras and written by Anthony Maras and David Haig. It's adapted from David Haig's 2014 stage play. It tells the story of the 72 hours leading up to D-Day as meteorologist Group Captain James Stagg is employed by General Eisenhower to predict the unpredictable, the weather for Operation Overlord. And of course, this is based on a true story. What did you think of this movie?
I have many thoughts on this movie. I enjoyed it, first of all. I went into it wanting to enjoy it, which I think helps. It's very blockbustery for me. It's not very artsy. It's pretty straightforward. I think it's well acted, mostly. I think it's an interesting sort of topic. It's very niche, obviously, because we've seen so many movies about D-Day. Like, what else can you do? But this one, at least, is sort of niche and not very well known, which I enjoyed. I guess it could seem kind of boring if you hear about a movie being about the weather, but it was pretty interesting, actually. So I enjoyed it. How about you?
Yeah, I broadly enjoyed the watching experience, and I think most people who watch it will come away and be like, yeah, that was sufficiently tense. It had a sufficient amount of conflict. It was well acted. I think broadly most people will probably like this movie. It does feel a bit like scraping the bottom of the barrel for D-Day movie ideas, the D-Day weatherman. Which is not to say they didn't still make it feel, high stakes, because they did. But we were talking about this a bit offline, and I was saying we've just seen that Terrence Malick film where artistically he took a risk, and this movie plays it really safe in that department. I think part of what made it enjoyable for me was, it's always fun to see someone's take on these larger-than-life historical figures. Obviously, seeing Brendan Fraser play Eisenhower is something that, I was very curious about, and of course he did a good job. But this was a bit of a fighting the good war type of movie. It didn't really have anything to say, I guess, like politically. So yeah, it was a little bit safe, but I think people will probably enjoy it.
Yeah, I really agree, and I guess that makes it such a blockbustery movie. Like, it can't really rub anyone the right way, and I think the best movies do. It's like you said, it's a little bit safe, and it plays it a little bit on the surface. Maybe they try to give Eisenhower this big, larger-than-life figure feelings about stuff, and I'm not sure if I believe them necessarily, even though Brendan Fraser is an excellent actor and Andrew Scott is great, and they're all very good. I just don't know if it's the kind of topic that lends itself particularly well to big feelings. And I kind of thought it was a bit of a shame that you have these really great actors and not make them act too hard, if that makes sense. Like, I feel like even Andrew Scott, he's playing a bit of they make him a little bit unlikable and a bit stiff at the beginning. And I don't know if I like that. I don't know, I like him very much as an actor, and I think he's good in this. I think all of them are capable of a little bit more, maybe, and I don't know if that's the writing or anything else.
I was reading about the director, and he even said something like, many people, particularly Americans, remember President Eisenhower. And so they have this idea of Eisenhower in their minds as the man who would later on, obviously well after the Second World War, would become the president of the United States. And he was a bit of a different person during World War II. He was someone who would smoke 4 to 6 packs a day of cigarettes. He was drinking like 24 cups of coffee. He was obviously feeling the weight of this immense responsibility on his shoulders. And so I don't know that this movie did enough to peel back the popular persona of Eisenhower to let us see this person who was more insecure at the time these events were going on.
You can definitely see that they tried with him, and it works on like a basic level. I don't think it works as they intended it to work. But that said, I was excited for this movie, and I didn't leave it feeling disappointed. So I guess those are both good things.
Yes. I mean, if you don't overthink it and you just watch this movie, you're gonna enjoy it. It's well put together. It feels a bit Oscar baity. I think people will broadly go and see it and have a good time.
Yes, it's not unlike The King's Speech in terms of Oscar Beatty stuff.
Oh, I was gonna mention the King's Speech too. I was like, that gives me similar vibes to this one.
Are you ready to get into the plot?
Let's do it.
Let's get into the plot. We open on a little boy, I want to say. It's a young man, and we're looking down at him on a beach as he's dying. And as we zoom out, we see more bodies wash ashore. And for a second, you think, is it D-Day already? Are we here? But no, we're in England in 1944. And there's a bit of a opening card. It says, the Allies have just attempted a large-scale rehearsal for D-Day known as Exercise Tiger. And then we see Dwight J. Eisenhower, or Ike, played by Brendan Fraser, as he watches worriedly from afar at this disaster unfolding on the beach.
Yes. So this is the foundation of Ike's concern about whether D-Day is going to go off without a hitch and all of these million little details that he has to pull together to make sure that it does. And obviously, this is why he's so concerned about the meteorological forecast, which is the basis for this movie. So Exercise Tiger took place in Slapton Sands in Devon, and they chose this location because it closely resembled Utah Beach. And so they had these 30,000 troops that were going to participate in this exercise. They were going to rehearse for D-Day. They were going to practice getting onto the landing craft. They were going to practice disembarking from the landing craft. Eisenhower wanted it to be realistic, so there was going to be live artillery. And so they evacuated all of the residents of this town. They covered the beach in mines and obstacles, so it would be similar to the way it was on D-Day. And they sent these guys in. So between April 27th to the 29th, 1944, unfortunately, they ran into a few issues. So when they were doing this fake landing, H hour was pushed back an hour for the landing troops, but some of the landing ships did not receive the message that the timing had changed. And so they arrived during this artillery bombardment that was supposed to be over by the time they got there. And this resulted in the deaths of over 100 servicemen. And then even more troops were killed when some German E-boats attacked landing ships that were in the English Channel. E-boats were these super fast surface attack craft, and they were able to torpedo some of these landing ships. And this resulted in the deaths of over 700 servicemen. So over 900 Allied servicemen altogether died during this exercise. And as a result, obviously, Eisenhower is feeling very responsible for this. But at the same time, the Allies learned some very important lessons that they were able to straighten out before D-Day. So some of these were they implemented new safety procedures, even something as simple as some of the men on the landing crafts didn't know how to put their life vests on. So when they got into the water, they were weighed down by their equipment and they drowned. And so it was giving these guys practical training about how do you put on your life vest, how do you evacuate a landing craft in an orderly fashion to maximize your chances of survival. They implemented rescue boats. So if any men were caught in the water around the landing ships on D-Day, they could be rescued. They put up stronger defensive screens because they knew that there was obviously a risk that these landing ships now could be targeted by German torpedoes. And they standardized their radio frequencies with the British so that they wouldn't have this risk of some messages not getting through.
That is one of the things that Eisenhower mentions later going wrong, is that their American radios weren't in tune with the English ones. So that's why those messages didn't get across. Which seems like a really stupid mistake. But then I guess you don't know until you get there, and then you're like, oh, wait, this is wrong.
Yeah, there's so many moving parts here, right? And they are planning this massive amphibious landing that's the largest one in history, and it hasn't been done before on this scale. It is obviously a tragedy that over 900 men died, but if you think about it, if they hadn't solved these problems, they would have reoccurred on a much more massive scale on D-Day. So this exercise, even though it went wrong, like that was kind of the point, to see what would go wrong so they could fix it.
It might have cost them the war if they hadn't had this mishap, probably. If they'd had all these problems at the real thing, who knows, right? If they'd even, managed to get off those beaches.
Yeah, for sure. It would have made things a lot more difficult.
And this is also, I guess, where the movie title, we haven't even talked about it yet, but it's called Pressure for several reasons. It's the literal air pressure, and it's the weather pressure, and it's the pressure on Ike, and it's basically the pressure on freaking everybody in this movie.
Yeah, for sure.
I like it as a title, to be honest. It's quirky and I like it.
Yeah, and we should say too, there's a number of small scenes during the movie where we see everyday soldiers hanging out. You know, they're obviously getting ready to participate in this massive amphibious assault, but they are still young men being young men. And we do get this sense of what the stakes are if, for example, Stagg isn't able to make an accurate weather prediction.
That's why the opening shot is so moving because the boy, I don't even want to call him a man, I think he's a boy. They did that on purpose, make you look at this young boy's, pretty boy's face as he's dying on the beach. It really reminds you that these people were so young and they were taking such a huge risk, but they had to. It's a good opening. I enjoyed the opening.
Yeah.
We then skip 6 weeks, and by now it's early June in the movie. We meet meteorologist and Group Captain James Stagg, played by Andrew Scott, as he says goodbye to his very heavily pregnant wife Liz, played by Tamsin Topolsky, because he is summoned by Eisenhower to get to work on the weather.
They've shortened the timeline here a little bit, obviously, to, make it a bit more tense. But in real life, Stagg joined the team in November of 1943. And he actually was the chief meteorologist before Eisenhower was chosen as the supreme commander. And so Stagg was on the team actually before Ike was. And in the few weeks before D-Day, Ike would stop by Stagg's desk and ask for a daily weather report. And so in this way, they were able to build a rapport. Eisenhower got to trust Stagg's judgment. Stagg was a geophysicist by trade, which is effectively using physics to study natural phenomena like oceans and air currents and that kind of stuff. And he'd been recently working at the Met Office, coordinating Air Force and Army weather services. Obviously, this impressed somebody somewhere, and that's why he was chosen for this job. And so when he gets into his position, there are 3 independent weather bureaus that report to him. So this consists of the U.S. Army Air Force. This is led by Colonel Crick, who we'll meet in the movie very shortly. The Met Office, that is short for Meteorological Office, and the Navy. And as we mentioned in our episode on The Longest Day, several factors were needed for a successful invasion, including a low tide. This is so that they can see the German obstacles on the beach. They're not going to be hidden by the water. A full moon so that when the paratroopers are dropping the night before, the pilots have some visibility and they're able to drop people in the correct spot. They need appropriate cloud cover for aircraft, but the aircrafts also need to be able to have sufficient visibility. And of course, they need good weather for a landing. So if the wind is too high and the waves are too high, this makes it extremely dangerous to drop men off in the water. And so he has this extremely difficult job of having to collate and aggregate and put all this information together and then interpret it in such a way that he can make an accurate prediction in an era where predicting the weather more than 24 hours out was viewed as not likely to be very accurate.
Stagg gets brought to their headquarters. By now it's June 2nd, I think. They don't really tell you in the movie, but it's got to be because it's about the 72 hours before D-Day, after all. And he's met by his aide from the Met Office, Andrew Carter, played by Jojo Macari. And Carter is impressed with Stagg because he's read some of his papers and is trying to have a talk with him about his papers and the things he knows. But Stagg is not very talkative, and as Carter shows him around the place, Stagg immediately hates everything about his working environment. It's noisy and there's people hammering away, and he's like, can people stop hammering for a second? And he also is not a fan of how the Met Office is doing things currently because they are not up to his standards, and Stagg is kind of portrayed as being no fun and very serious and unlikable, almost, in a way. I think the movie does this on purpose to offset him against Crick in a minute, but we need it for the tension and the pressure.
Yes, I think if you go and look at a picture of James Stagg, you could just tell from his photo that he was a very buttoned-up, austere kind of person.
Yes, and we all like Andrew Scott too much for it to be entirely believable that he would be like that.
Stagg meets First Lieutenant Kay Summersby, played by Carrie Condon, who takes him up to see Ike. She's Ike's secretary. She has his ear. She pretty much runs the place. And she ends up being kind of an emotional go-between between Stagg and Ike in the film, which I don't know if that's directly accurate to real life, but I'm not angry about it because I think she is a good a well-written character, and I was glad to see that they gave a woman something to do in this movie.
I also liked her a lot. I thought the movie could have gone a number of ways. They could have leaned into the fact that she had a supposed affair with Eisenhower, and they didn't hammer on that too much. Like, it was clear that they had a personal relationship, but the movie didn't make it about them specifically, and I enjoyed that they let her be this woman who could talk back to Ike, but also just ran circles around all the other men that were there, and I enjoyed that in the movie.
Prior to the war, Summersby had had several jobs, including fashion model, so you may not expect that she would be raised to this position of importance, but she drove ambulances during the Blitz, and she was so good at it. She was so good at navigating London at night when some familiar landmarks were gone, when it was very dangerous, that she became Eisenhower's driver in May of 1942. And then as he was promoted to Supreme Commander, she went with him and she became his personal assistant. And so even after he had a new driver, she was around. She'd been previously married, and at the time she met Ike, she actually had a fiance who unfortunately shortly after died in the North African campaign while he was clearing mines. And she was very heavily involved in Eisenhower's life. She was the host of his formal dinner parties when he had, he would have the brass over to discuss military strategy and that kind of stuff. And she was even there when he signed the German surrender in May of 1945.
I also want to say that Kerry Condon, as an actress, I think she's great. I think she's very charming, and she looks like she could run circles around these men. So I think it's really well cast.
Yeah, I thought she was quite good. And I like that I believe the real life Kay Summersby was 40-ish when this happened, maybe in her late 30s. And so I did like that they cast an actor who was the appropriate age and someone with a little more life experience and gravitas.
Ike tells Stagg, as they meet for the first time in the movie, that D-Day is on June 5th, and asks Stagg to give him a weather prediction. Basically tells him, give me a good one. And Stagg then tells him, in no uncertain terms, that he can't possibly predict accurately because it's too far in the future. And Ike and Summersby have a little back and forth about whether this is considered to be far away in the future. And Stagg doesn't smile or laugh or do anything, and he reluctantly says he'll do his best. And of course, Ike is like, I already expect the best. And then we learn that Churchill recommended Stagg to him over Crick. And Crick is, as already mentioned, the American equivalent of Stagg, and someone that Ike has been working with for a while. But Stagg isn't there to impress anybody. He's just there to tell accurate weather as best he can.
Eisenhower had worked closely with Crick in the North African campaign. Crick had provided him with a lot of accurate weather forecasts before, and so the fact that he went with Stagg over Crick is kind of interesting.
Yep.
So Colonel Irving P. Crick is played by Chris Messina in this movie. He's fun. He's annoyingly charming compared to Stagg. It's very American versus British, like almost stereotypically. And if you look up a picture of Crick, you can just tell by looking at him that he's kind of a little bit of a charmer, maybe some used car salesman type vibes. He uses analog weather charts from years ago to predict sunny weather on D-Day, but Stagg is like, well, I don't want to go with this analog data. Weather over England is notoriously unpredictable. He wants real data. Now, the way that Crick predicted the weather is actually a method that we often use today. So a lot of the kind of digital projections of the weather that a lot of weather forecasts are based on in this day and age are based on computers looking at historical data and going, okay, with all of these variables in place in the past when this happened, this was the weather outcome. And so this method that Crick is using is not obsolete necessarily. It's just that it works better in some weather contexts than others.
Yeah, and also, as we'll figure out later in the movie, Crick leaves out the charts and circumstances that don't really fit the narrative of having good weather. So it's a bit pick and choose, and obviously, if you look at his evidence, it would be likely to assume that there would be good weather on D-Day, except Stagg uses a different method, and he looks at plenty of things it puts them all together in a different way. So obviously they are going to disagree, and they kind of have to, because otherwise you wouldn't have a movie. But yeah.
Yeah, and Crick as well is willing to be very confident about his prediction, whereas Stagg is much more cautious. He's like, well, I can predict the weather, but it's the weather. And so any prediction that I make, it's possible for it to be wrong. And he's unwilling to say 100% this is what the weather will be. Whereas Crick is much more likely to be like, I'm so confident in this prediction and, I have a history of being right. And so this is kind of a thing too, right? Eisenhower is used to getting this advice where the person giving it to him is very like, yep, I'm sure, go ahead. And Stagg is really not like that.
Yep, Stagg is also very British in the sense that he doesn't want to boast, but also, in this case, he's right not to boast about something as unpredictable as the weather.
Yeah. So a little history on meteorology. Obviously, historically, a lot of people tried to predict the weather, but without much accuracy. And by the 1500s, there were these two schools of thought. So there was theoretical science based on past observations, and there was also astrology. And so a lot of people thought that you could maybe tell the weather by looking at the stars. And then we move a little bit forward in time, and Rene Descartes begins the scientific revolution in meteorology. He starts making deductive conclusions about weather phenomena, and this establishes meteorology as a legitimate science. It's no longer guesswork. It's like, well, okay, maybe we can actually make predictions about this. And then a little bit further in time, the thermometer and barometer are invented in the 18th century. And so we're able to start actually measuring weather data over time. And then in the 19th century, we are able to start establishing weather observing networks because of the telegraph and being able to take photographs. And so people all over the world can start transmitting information to each other, and that makes the predictive data a little better. The first routine weather forecast is made in 1902. Scientists begin to consider mathematical models to make predictions in the early 20th century and trying to figure out what kind of data that they need to pull those together. And then in 1919, there's this concept that really revolutionizes weather forecasting, and this is the Norwegian cyclone model. And this starts to view weather systems as having distinct warm and cold fronts. And so they're saying you can't just look at surface observations, you have to consider upper atmosphere conditions because those impact the weather as well. And we do see Stagg specifically mentioning in the movie, he's going, why don't we have any data on upper atmosphere conditions? This is really going to affect our weather forecast. And it wasn't until after the war that digital computers could assist with predictions. So in this time period, much of a good meteorologist's value is being able to connect disparate data and fill in the blanks.
It's pretty amazing, actually, when you think about it, that the weather forecast is still so unpredictable. Like, they cannot try to predict it, but they are hardly ever completely right about it.
Yeah, for sure. Exactly. It's so changeable, and they're in a situation where they can't really afford to make mistakes.
No, there's a couple of 100,000 lives at stake. Stagg, based on real data, predicts bad weather on June 5th and makes enemies of pretty much everybody.
Yeah, he doesn't just want to tell people what they want to hear. He's going to give them
Right.
the actual forecast, and that is very much not what people are interested in in hearing. They really want June 5th to be a go. All these pieces are in place. One of the things I enjoyed was that we did get to see a few little scenes of like, out in the ocean and in various places around the world, people are putting up weather balloons to try and gather data, and that's the data that Stagg is using to try and make a prediction.
Yeah, it's a pretty smart way of show don't tell, but it's immediately clear what it is that you're looking at. I quite enjoyed that. And another thing we see all throughout the movie is the fact that they used real footage in between the modern footage. Like, you see soldiers, you see the sea as it was at the time, you see a bunch of like black and white stuff that's being colorized, and it's really interesting and really well done as well.
Yeah.
We see Bernard Montgomery, or Monty, played by Damian Lewis, and he's showing some deception troops, as we have seen before. We also see, for example, the dummy paratroops called the Ruperts, and we saw this in On Longest Day. If you want to go listen to the episode, we talk a little bit more about those. And Monty wants D-Day as quickly as possible, and he even suggests moving it forward. And he doesn't really give a shit about the weather. He's like, we need D-Day to happen regardless of the weather, and he even tries to kind of pressure Stagg into changing his mind about the weather. He's very unpleasant in this movie. This entire movie made me not like Monty very much.
From his side of things, he's like, well, we've put all of these deception measures in place, and the longer that we wait, the more likely it is that the Germans are going to discover that we're messing with them and we'll figure out what our real plans are.
Monty and Eisenhower were very different in terms of leadership. As Monty likes to remind Eisenhower, he's been in battle versus Eisenhower's never been in battle. Eisenhower wanted to do like an assault on all fronts with all the armies and all people together, and Monty would have liked to have done it by himself, so they were very different kind of men, and they are kind of the other point of contention, I guess, for this movie. You've got Stagg and Crick on the one hand, and you've got Monty and Ike on the other, like, providing all the tension between the characters in this movie.
Yeah, and I think we talked about Monty in quite a bit more detail in our A Bridge Too Far episode, if you want to go check that out. More of what kind of leader he was and what kind of leader the Germans expected him to be.
If I remember correctly, that movie even opens saying these two were rivals, so it makes sense.
Yeah, for sure.
And we also talk about Monty in even more detail in the I Was Monty's Double episode, if you want to go listen to that as well.
Yes, if I remember correctly, the gentleman who played Monty's double was actually present at the tiger exercise.
Oh, I'm sure that would make all the sense.
Stagg attends the meeting of the big brass alone. He doesn't take Crick with him because he doesn't want there to be conflicting ideas that he's presenting. He wants to tell them his prediction alone. And he advises them not to go on June the 5th because there are these two storms and they're going to come in and they're going to cause these really terrible weather conditions for landing. And he actually suggests that they don't go until June 18th. And of course, everyone is quite up in arms about this. I mean, there's so many factors in place, right? It's like they already have all these troops loaded on boats. A lot of these people have been briefed on different elements of the D-Day landings. Now, if you let these people loose, there's much more possibility that German intelligence is going to pick up details about D-Day that they shouldn't have. You know, even things like having to refuel all of these vessels. There's just so many moving parts that if they delay it by a couple of weeks, it's going to be a huge pain in the ass.
And this is actually the part in the movie where we get to learn about the conditions that Sam mentioned earlier that all need to kind of coincide with one another. And it's Monty that reminds Stagg that that only happens on June 5th. And then obviously there's not going to be another one for ages and ages until June 18th. So not a lot of people like Stagg at this point, but he also is not there to be liked, which he reminds people of later in the movie.
Yeah. And then we get to see Eisenhower deep in thought. He's reflecting on Exercise Tiger again and the fact that as much as he wants to go on June the 5th and they're ready to go on June the 5th, he doesn't want unnecessary casualties, and he realizes that all it takes is one mistake, and this is too important to risk it.
Crick then comes to Ike to complain about Stagg, and as he's there with Ike, Summersby comes in and informs Ike that the D-Day landings have been leaked, and you can tell that almost this isn't the first time that intelligence has leaked, and he tells her to handle it, and she does. Just another reminder of how fragile this entire operation is. Like, if the Germans find out that they're coming, then the element of surprise is gone, and then there's no point in doing it.
Yeah. So this is based on real events. The Associated Press sent out a mistaken news flash on June 3rd, 1944, supposedly the result of a typist error. There was a typist practicing, what they would release when the invasion did happen. And so this flash goes out saying that the Allies have landed. And though the AP quickly retracted the error, many newspapers picked it up and ran it as front page news over the next couple of days.
I wonder if that in the end ended up helping them in a way too, because it had been mistakenly let out there. And obviously it didn't happen, so that would have caused confusion, maybe.
Right. And as we've talked about in previous episodes, the Germans knew that something was coming. The fact that they had so many troops and vessels and planes, etc., gathered in the south of England, I mean, it was impossible for German reconnaissance to miss it. So they knew that an invasion was probable, but they didn't have all of the details, right? So
No. And as we'll find out, Rommel on the day of the invasion is away.
After Crick goes to Eisenhower and tells him that he thinks Stagg's forecast is wrong, Stagg gets a real earful from Ike. Ike is like, well, I trust this guy. How come you came and you didn't let him come to the meeting and you didn't let me hear his misgivings about your forecast? And then Summersby comforts him and tells him about what she's done in the war, her ambulance driving stuff, and her history with Ike.
This is the closest we get to a hint of her being in a relationship with Ike without him saying so exactly. He talks to her about him and about the time they had together, and it's like, must have been exciting. And she says it very, like, corny. Sometimes it's a nice conversation, and then they also just are a little friendly together. And she says how weathermen are a little boring. And he has this whole passionate monologue about weathermen maybe, but how can you call the weather boring? And it's quite a nice thing to hear about the weather, because you could say the same thing about the movie, but it's still very interesting. So,
Yeah, for sure. It's nice that he has someone to commiserate with in this, occasionally hostile environment in which he finds himself.
apparently in real life, this, like, blowing up by Eisenhower at Stagg did not happen. They had a pretty professional relationship. They'd been working together a bit longer, obviously, and they knew the stakes. So this didn't happen, but I know why it did in the movie. It makes sense. And you kind of need it. You need the conflict for it to be a good movie.
Yeah,
So,
and it gives us a better sense of how stressed out and anxious Eisenhower is about all of this and how badly he wants it to go right. And this would be the one time where it would be nice to have a solid, concrete, universally agreed upon forecast, and they just don't have it.
yes. Like, who do you believe? From Eisenhower's point of view, it would be illogical for him to want to believe Crick because he had been right so often. Except, as Stagg likes to remind him, the weather conditions that Crick predicted were far more stable than the weather in England. So he got lucky, as he says in the movie.
Yeah.
It's June 4th, 1 a.m. in the night, so we're approaching upon the original D-Day. Stagg and Crick still won't agree on the weather, and the tensions rise. And then the phone rings, and it's for Stagg, and Stagg learns that his wife is in St. Mary's Hospital, and it's been bombed, and that's all he hears, and he doesn't know if she's still alive, or how the baby's doing, or anything. And he kind of swallows and goes back to work, and Ike still wants to invade on Monday, and he gives Stagg 3 hours to prove that there are going to be the storms inbound that he's saying that there are, and to give him proof that they shouldn't do the invasion on June 5th. So it's very tense. The pressure's up.
Yes. Title of the movie, take a drink. Yeah. And then Summersby tells Ike off a little bit. She's like, look, Stagg just found out that his wife could be dead. He doesn't know anything more about it. And just a little reminder that you're not the only one under pressure here. In their final briefing to the brass, after they've been up working all night, Crick and Stagg are still on opposite ends. And we see Stagg the most heated he's been. In as much as he is confident in his weather forecast, he's like, I know it's not going to be a sunny day. I know that that's wrong. So Ike makes the very difficult decision to postpone D-Day.
Yeah, man, this scene was pretty well acted, I thought. It's nice to see Andrew Scott get to act a bit. I feel like his character is so muted just as his character that it's nice to see him blow up.
Yes, definitely.
And he also calls Crick moronic at some point, not in the same scene, but I like that quite a bit. He's got such, like, almost sarcastic sense of humor. It's in there somewhere.
Yeah, and you just got to think you're probably more likely to get Crick on side if you don't go around assuming that everything that he knows is wrong and calling him a moron.
I did root, obviously, for Stagg, but I watched it again, and I felt kind of bad for Crick. I mean, he's been kind of made to look the fool in this movie. I wonder if it was that intense in real life.
Yeah, I mean, I know that they didn't agree in real life and they had these two diametrically opposed methods of forecasting the weather. But I mean, like we said, Crick in many contexts would have been entirely correct to predict the weather in the way that he did. He just didn't have the expertise required in this particular situation.
Yeah. Another thing, by the way, that the movie does that I do like is that they kind of showcase Stagg's team, and you get to see what everybody's doing, and everyone's like pulling their weight, and you get to see all the women doing their thing as well, because I reckon there were quite a few women in this department. And even though they don't have a lot of lines, you do get to see them on phones and like getting like diagrams and all that. And I thought it was good that they showed his whole team. And it felt different in that way to the Alan Turing movie, The Imitation Game, where it felt like everybody else was an idiot and only Alan Turing was smart. It feels like to me, even though they don't like him at first, the team really becomes a team and they're looking for good evidence, and I enjoyed that.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's Sunday, June 4th, and it's sunny as hell, and they've obviously decided not to go on with D-Day, so everyone's sitting in chairs looking out at the sunshine, and even Stagg is looking out at the sun, but he just knows that it's gonna rain. Everybody's in a church. Stagg is not. He's on the outside. He's looking at them being all gloomy about not going for D-Day. And then, as he stands outside under a tree, the sun goes away, the wind picks up, and there's a massive storm.
Yeah, everyone leaves the church, and then you just see Crick sitting in there, realizing that he was wrong. Dagg's team does some more work. They find that there's going to be a break in the storm on June 6th. This is not a huge break, but it's a gap long enough where D-Day could potentially go ahead. And so Stagg digs up some more evidence and he asks Crick for a second opinion. And this was quite nice. He goes in and he's like, yeah, I think I found a break in the storm, etc. And Crick is like, man, just, you were right. It's fine. Like, look out the window. It's clearly storming. And Stagg is like, well, no, now I'm thinking that maybe there's a way for us to still make this work. And so he gets Crick's approval, and then he goes to break the news to Eisenhower that they can potentially go on June the 6th.
Eisenhower, upon hearing this news, is like, what the fuck are you talking about? You just said that there was going to be a storm and there's a freaking hurricane outside. The delivery of this next line by Andrew Scott as Stagg tells him, technically it's not a hurricane, sir. And it's so funny. But yes, he tells Ike that they can go out and they should do it on June 6th because that's the only day there's going to be a tiny, tiny window where they can do it. And it's just so funny to me.
Yeah, and they need to make sure, right? Like they don't want to end up in a situation where the break in the storm is so short that they can only get, a certain percentage of men on the beach, and then they end up stranded there because they can't offload everybody and everything else. And so Eisenhower is like, I really want you to be sure that we definitely can land guys on June the 6th and that everything is going to be fine.
Imagine how Eisenhower must have felt just being told, no, you can't go, and then suddenly, oh, but you have to go right now. If you don't go now, you miss this window. So D-Day ensues, and while the weather is not like super sunny, it's also not bad, and they do have the window where they can land safely. We also see Ike as he's greeting some troops on the ground before they leave, and then we see D-Day. There's a bit of shooting on the beach. I don't know if I thought this was strictly necessary to show, but there's a bit of like blood and people are dying a bit. But then, despite the heavy fighting, they make it onto the beaches and they secure the beaches, and that's when they all celebrate.
Yes, it's very intense. Everybody, Eisenhower, Monty, Stagg, Crick, they're all in this room together, and there are all these women operating the telephones, waiting for information from the front and how things are going. And I feel like they felt like they had to show some fighting. They were like, we're doing a D-Day movie. We can't just not show the landings. The real action for our purposes is this little room where all these people are waiting to see if, this weather forecast is correct, if this invasion is able to be successful.
I do also really like that before they enter this room, it's Stagg and Crick asking each other if they slept. And they're like, not a wink. You? And they're finally friends.
Yeah. And the Allies certainly benefited from the Germans believing that no one would invade in this weather. And as we discussed in our Longest Day episode, the Germans had noticed that the British had a past track record during the war for attacking on calm days. So certainly they were caught off guard by the Allies taking advantage of this gap in the storm.
Yeah, and well, Stagg's job is over. He says goodbye to Summersby. They even have a little hug together, which is quite nice. It did feel a little bit awkward, I'm not gonna lie. But Stagg goes to the hospital. It's all very tense still. The pressure's still on because he doesn't know what happened to his wife. So he goes over there and he finds her and they have a reunion and they're both crying. And then it's still tense because you don't know where their son is. And then the camera pans suddenly over to a crying boy. And thank God they both survived and he's now dead.
Yeah. Personal stakes in the movie about the D-Day weatherman. This is an end card that says, at his inauguration in 1961, JFK asked Eisenhower what gave him the edge on D-Day. Eisenhower replied, "We had better meteorologists than the Germans."
It feels to me kind of lackluster for that to be the reason. But I guess it's true.
Yeah, for sure.
And that's the end of the movie. I enjoyed that, despite all the things we've already mentioned about, do we really need another movie about D-Day? You have some notes. Tell me your
I
notes.
do. Yeah. So, just a bit of a postscript on Stagg. After the war, he returned to the Met Office, to his previous career. He was knighted in 1954, and he went on to publish a memoir in 1971, and then he passed away in 1975. And I enjoyed this. I was reading an article from the Smithsonian Magazine about pressure, about the movie, and about how historically accurate it is. And it's a really good article, so we'll definitely link it on the website if anyone wants to check it out. But they said, Crick, for his part, claimed credit for the invasion forecast until his death in 1996.
Jesus Christ. Why am I not surprised?
Yeah, it made me laugh. And a little more info on Summersby as our main female character in this film. She became a captain in the U.S. Women's Army Corps and an American citizen after the war with Eisenhower's help. She was awarded several medals, including the British Empire Medal and the Bronze Star. And she went on to become a costume designer and TV fashion consultant after the war. But I kind of got the sense that, like many people who find themselves at the center of momentous events, she felt the rest of her life was a little bit of an anticlimax. And as per her affair with Ike, her 1948 memoir does not mention an affair, which, considering the time period in which it was written, you could maybe see why that would be the case if there had been an affair that she didn't mention it. But then the memoir that was published after her death and written after Eisenhower's death in 1969 stated that they had been romantically involved. Now, Summersby herself is only mentioned once in Eisenhower's 1948 war memoir. Again, this could be, you might not want to publicize something like that. It would be very bad for his public persona. We don't know for sure that they actually had an affair. Certainly there were rumors at the time because they were very close. And Summersby even said in her book that they never consummated their affair. They had some kisses, but they weren't actually sleeping together. And some people have said that perhaps the emphasis on her supposed affair with Eisenhower in the later memoir was put in there to stir up interest and generate sales for the book. So we don't really know what the truth was. But supposedly she once called at the White House during Eisenhower's presidency, and he received her very graciously, and they had a little visit, and then she was politely told not to call again. So
That hurts.
yeah.
But yeah, I like that the movie didn't go with the rumors. It gives her more agency, I think, in a movie like this for her not to be in an affair with Ike.
I think if you're making a movie where you are trying to tell this true story, I mean, from the guy who wrote the play, Haig, from his point of view, he had said that he wanted to write about a Scottish war hero. So if you're trying to make a movie that's fairly historically accurate, I can see why you would not include that, because that would maybe place some doubt on the veracity of the rest of the film.
Yes, I agree. And it's nice, to have a female character that's not there to please the man, for once.
Yeah, for sure.
We have to rate this movie, but before we do, I would like to remind you that you can follow us wherever you get your podcast. I would like to implore you to follow us on Apple Podcasts if you're on there, because most of our listeners are from there, but they are not subscribed to our podcast, so I would say please do that. And you can also send this episode to a friend.
Every time you send this episode to a friend, a female actor gets a meaty part in a World War II movie.
Perfect. We're rating this movie Eisenhower's big ass foreheads out of 10. And do you want to go first, Sam?
Sure. I'll rate this movie 7.5 Eisenhower's big ass foreheads out of 10 because I think it's very watchable and I think it's fairly historically accurate. And I like that there was a female character with something to do. It has its minor issues, as I said. I feel like it's playing it pretty safe. I don't feel like it took any big swings artistically, but as a historical drama, it's definitely not the worst one we've seen. And I think people will like this movie. I think it'll be fairly successful and it'll probably win some awards. How about you?
Same. Like, I even have the same rating in mind, so I'm also gonna rate this 7.5 Eisenhower's big ass foreheads out of 10. And that was also my rating for the exact same reason. And also because I like pretty much every single actor in this movie. Everyone is good. Even though some of the brass are kind of funny, and I feel like it's difficult to play a part like Monty and not look kind of clownish, which I thought Damien Lewis did a great job, but also it's such a funny little part to play. So I don't know if it's good or not. I can't tell. But yeah, so the same rating for me, and yeah, no extra argumentation there. Are you reading anything?
Yes, I am reading Untold: Northeastern Ontario's Military Past by Dieter K. Buse and Graham S. Mount. This book is about 1662 through to World War I. And then there is or will be a volume about World War II and the Cold War, I believe. So I'll definitely have to pick that one up after. Yeah, just interested in reading a little more about the history of the place that I'm from.
That sounds kind of meaty, actually, as far as books go. And also,
Yeah.
please remind people of the book that you've just finished, just to give people a heads up about the episodes that is coming next.
Yeah, I recently finished the Oppenheimer biography, American Prometheus. It was long, but it was pretty interesting looking at particularly the post-war politics and, the witch hunt that Oppenheimer was subjected to during the McCarthy era. So yeah, we're going to talk about that pretty soon.
And George is going to be back with us, which has been a while, so it'll be good to have them back on.
Yes.
And I'm also reading something for once. I'm reading Project Hail Mary. A bit late, but it's really fun.
Yeah, that was a good one. I liked it.
And I just bought 6 other books, and none of them are nonfiction. They're all fiction.
Hell yeah. It's the novel summer. We're reading novels.
Whew! Yeah, I'm looking forward to getting into those. I hope I will stick with them for once. If not, they look nice on my shelf.
Yeah, every book reader needs to have a huge collection of books that are on their to-read list.
Yeah, because what is life if not filled with books that you haven't read?
Yeah, always nice to have something to look forward to.
Right. Thank you for listening to yet another episode of Rosie. You can follow us wherever you get your podcast and rate us 5 stars. You can send this episode to a friend. You can follow us on Instagram at Rosie the Reviewer Podcast, or you can visit our website, rosieTheReviewer.com, where you can also rate this movie with us, and that would be fun. So please do that. And we'll see you next week.
Bye.
Bye.